We tend to think of huge societal shifts as these massive, inevitable forces of nature. But what if the way we imagine change is just wrong? Today, we're going to connect two things that sound totally unrelated: hotel ice machines and the invention of the car, to figure out how big changes actually happen. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with a really simple question.
Now, really think about it for a second. You can walk into pretty much any hotel in the US, and somewhere down that long hallway, you'll find it. That humming machine ready to spit out free frozen water. Why is that specific thing so universal? Your first guess is probably the most obvious one.
I mean, sure, it's convenient, but a lot of things are convenient. How many times have you been in a hotel room where the only light comes from a couple of lamps on the nightstand? A good overhead light would be convenient too, but they don't always have that. So no, simple guest convenience isn't the whole story here. And it is definitely not because it's cheap for them. In fact, before this was standard, hotels actually made money off ice. They'd charge you for it, sometimes even by the cube. It was a nice little revenue stream. So what on earth could make an entire industry decide to give away a product for free all across the country? Well, the answer isn't some grand economic principle. It's actually a story about one person. A guy named Kemmons Wilson, who, while on a road trip with his family, just got totally fed up with being nickel and dimed for ice. And that one moment of pure frustration, well, it sparked an idea that changed an entire industry. So this first story is the perfect example of how we think change works, right? One person has one really good idea, and boom, the world is different. Let's take a look at how Kemmons Wilson actually pulled it off. The amazing thing to see here is just the speed of it all. See, Wilson didn't just have an idea. He had a game-changing business model, franchising. He made free ice a non-negotiable part of the Holiday Inn brand. So every single time a new Holiday Inn opened, it put more pressure on the competition. In just 16 years, he built 1,000 of them. If you were another hotel, you had no choice. To compete, you had to start giving away ice too. One guy's annoyance, scaled up by a brilliant system, created a new national standard. Okay, so a simple story works perfectly for a pretty simple change. But what happens when the change is, monumentally bigger? This is where our story gets really interesting. Because changing a hotel amenity is one thing, but changing the entire way a society gets around, that's a whole different ballgame. So on one side, you have Kemmons Wilson's decision. It's a small tweak inside a system that already exists. On the other side, you have the shift from the horse to the automobile, a change that literally reshaped our cities, our economy, our whole culture. The scale isn't even comparable. So, can we find a single Kemmons Wilson of the automobile? Is there one person or one single invention that explains it all? The common story we tell ourselves is that the car was just a better piece of tech, and it naturally took over. But as we're about to see, that simple story is just as wrong as saying free ice is all about convenience. To really understand a massive shift like the rise of the car, we need a whole new way of looking at it. We can't just look at the machine itself. We have to look at the entire system that it's a part of. Some academics call this the seamless web. Now, socio-technical system sounds super academic, I know, but the idea behind it is actually really simple. Basically, a technology never exists in a vacuum. To make a car useful, you need so much more than just the car. You need this whole constellation of other things, all working together perfectly. This here explains it perfectly. Just look at all these connected pieces. The car is only the object in the middle. It's totally useless without roads, traffic laws, gas stations, repair shops, and even big cultural ideas like the feeling that a car equals freedom. This whole web is the system. And here's the critical part. For the car to win, it didn't just have to be a better machine, it had to build a whole new system around itself and tear the old one down. All right, so let's use this new systems thinking approach to look at the real story. We're going to take apart that old myth that the car just showed up one day and beat the horse in a fair fight. You've probably seen a chart like this one before, right? As the car line goes up, the horse line goes down. Looks like a simple, clean swap. But this graph is so misleading because it hides all the most important parts of the story. It makes you think cars were invented to do the exact same job as a horse, but they weren't, not at first anyway. This quote from the researcher F.W. Giels really hits the nail on the head. Early cars were not practical vehicles for getting from point A to point B. They were basically toys for rich people, machines built for racing, for adventure, for showing off. They weren't competing with the horse for your daily commute. They were creating a whole new reason to travel. And super important here, that simple story leaves out the two technologies that really set the stage. First, you had the electric tram. That was the first thing to seriously challenge the horse in cities, and it turned streets from social places into high-speed transportation corridors. And then you had the bicycle. It got people hooked on the idea of traveling for fun, and, this is huge, it was bicycle clubs that started the Good Roads movement, demanding the paved surfaces that cars would desperately need later on.
And check this out. In the beginning, it wasn't just one automobile. There were 3 different kinds, and they were all living in their own little worlds. Electric cars were perfect for quiet, clean city driving. Gasoline cars were for long-distance racing and thrill-seeking, and steam cars were mostly for nerdy hobbyists. Each one survived because it was developing in its own protected space, its own niche, solving different problems for different kinds of people.
So if big change isn't a simple one-for-one replacement, what is it? Well, this is where we get to a really powerful theory called the multi-level perspective. It gives us a map, basically, for understanding these big, messy, complicated transitions. Okay, this diagram is the key to the whole thing. It shows change happening on 3 different levels at once. Down at the bottom, you have niches. Think of these as little protected greenhouses where radical new ideas can grow without having to compete with the big guys right away. In the middle, you have the socio-technical regime. That's the established, stable system, like the world of the horse and buggy. And way up at the top is the landscape. These are the huge, slow-moving trends like cities getting bigger or new ideas about hygiene. Real massive change only happens when things on these 3 levels start to line up.
So let's walk through it with the car. First, those big landscape trends. Cities getting bigger, people getting worried about public health, start putting pressure on the old horse-based system. This pressure creates cracks in that old system, the regime. Suddenly, all that horse manure in the streets isn't just normal, it's a crisis. These cracks create a window of opportunity. And it's through that window that a radical new idea that's been growing safely in a niche, like the gasoline touring car, can finally burst through and start to challenge the old way of doing things. And that breakthrough isn't just one single event. This chart shows it's a process of niche accumulation. It's like a snowball effect. The gasoline car first proved itself in the racing niche. Then it took over the touring for fun niche. From there, it jumped to a more practical use. Doctors, who needed to make house calls, and then farmers, who needed to get to market. With every new niche it conquered, the car and its whole support system got stronger and stronger, until finally, it was ready to become the transportation solution for everybody.
So we started with a simple story about an annoyed dad in a hotel ice machine, and we've ended up with this powerful new way of seeing the world. And this theory isn't just about history. It's a lens we can use to understand the massive changes that are happening all around us right now. Okay, so here's the single most important takeaway. Big change isn't one thing simply replacing another. It's a much messier, much more dynamic process. The old system, the regime, has to actually fall apart or de-align. And at the very same time, all the different pieces of a brand new system have to come together or realign around that new idea that broke out of its niche. It is a fundamental restructuring of how we do things. And all this brings us to one final big question. This theory gives us a brand new way to look at the world. Think about the massive systems that define our lives today, how we get our energy, how we produce our food, how we communicate. What are the big landscape pressures stressing them out? What cracks are starting to show? And maybe most importantly, what are the weird, the exciting, the radical new ideas that are quietly growing in the niches right now, just waiting for their window of opportunity? Because that's how change really happens.